the biggest strengths for South Carolina that not enough people are talking about, and why one of those actually might be the coaching staff. Locked On Gamecock starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. I am your host, Chris Marler. It is good to be with you as always. It is Thursday, and it is August 15th. Happy payday to everyone. And halfway through the month, we are less than 10 days of college football season. But I appreciate you guys listening and making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen each and every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Remember, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by our good friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, we're a minute and 7 seconds into the show. Yesterday, someone was very upset that it took 4 minutes to get to the content. So let's get to the content now to appease that person and the rest of y'all. I'm fired up about today's show. We have a good episode coming. We're going to be talking about the strengths that not enough people around South Carolina are not talking enough about, and why it's the coaching staff. We're also going to talk about the top 5 games for South Carolina over the last 10 years in honor of the SEC Network's 10-year anniversary. Also going to give you a basketball update. So let's get right into it. I was thinking about this today, going over some show notes as we count down the days of kickoff. Now, we're in the single digits till college football season itself starts. Obviously, Carolina doesn't start until week 1, not week 0. But I was thinking about what is some of the things that differentiate South Carolina this season in a positive way than other programs. And one of the things that jumped out to me, and I don't know how I didn't think about this at all, but obviously you have Beamer back. Obviously, last year, you guys hate when I use this word, but there was some hot seat talk about your coordinators, not necessarily Dell Loggins, right? But your DC and some of the concerns there. And you bring Clayton White back again and all that. So you have continuity across the board from your head coach, your offensive coordinator, and your defensive coordinator. Guys, that may sound pretty simple and like it's not a big deal. That in this day and age of football, that is very rare. And if you don't believe me, I'm about to throw out a stat to you that blew my mind when I first heard it. You know that South Carolina is one of only 2 teams in the entire SEC, 2, that doesn't have a change at all in job or title for offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and or head coach. One of only 2 teams in the entire conference that is not going into this season having to break in a new name and face at one of those 3 very, very important positions. It's South Carolina and Tennessee. That's it. I was mind blown. I mean, now listen, there's a couple on here. Like you got obviously Alabama, who replaces their head coach, OC, and DC, right? Mississippi State's the same thing because you got Jeff Levy, even though he's the head coach and the OC, but it's still something new there. A&M, since they got rid of Jimbo, same situation. You got a new DC, OC, and head coach. Then you got other situations like Georgia's only change is Travaris Robinson being a co-DC. I believe they have 3 of those now, which is insane to me. But I'm pretty sure it's him, Glenn Schumann, and Will Muschamp. But South Carolina is one of only 2 teams in the SEC that doesn't have any turnover at those positions. And that is a massive, massive deal, especially when you talk about trying to get into a situation where, like, in college football now and NIL era and the transfer portal era and all that kind of stuff, the change year to year, not just with like rules and how the game is played and all the different things that we have, that are seem to be ever changing in college football, but from a roster standpoint and in the portal, and you got guys that are allowed to go from conference to conference. It used to be that, like, if you went D1 to D1, you had to sit out a year. You don't have that anymore. I think that's a big deal for South Carolina. And I think it's something that's really not being talked enough about, because when you have that kind of continuity, we've seen in the past for other teams, that I'm not putting this team on the same pedestal, but when you talk about some of those teams in Alabama or even with Georgia, right? Like the turnover you saw last year, like Bobo wasn't very different than Todd Monken, but you saw at times when it cost him. And any sort of turnover is a disruption and a new beginning to some degree. And man, the more I look at it and you think about the fact it's like, all right, there's the most continuity you've had at the coaching staff, or the most continuity you've had in comparison to the rest of the SEC in a while. Then you talk about the offensive line, where it's like one player was getting injured every single game last year. You got more continuity up front. And then obviously with the defensive faces. And then the other thing that made me realize too is, how about the veteran experience and leadership and just upperclassmen seniority, right? That's a lot of words that I think all mean the same thing. But when you talk about the roster itself, and I mean, I'm not going to get into the too deep, but when you talk about the starting 22, and you can even expand it to the 24 when you include the punter and kicker situation, you've got new guys all over the field, right? You got new guys all over the field. But when you talk about the starting 24, right? So the 11 on offense, 11 on defense, and the 2 on special teams, you got about 16 or 17 of those players that are all upperclassmen. Over half are seniors. Again, some of them are going to be first-time starters. Some of them are going to be, guys that didn't start here a year ago, like Kennard kid from Georgia Tech and all that kind of stuff. But you've got veteran leadership and veteran experience and veteran players that are on this roster and on that starting 22. I think that's also a big deal. If there's one thing that has really stood out to me in college football over the last couple of years, and I'll give you a specific example that's specific to one position. But you think about, like, with the COVID year especially, you've got guys that are in college for longer and longer. Cam Rising has been in college since, I believe, the Reagan administration out there at Utah. Stetson Bennett was in college for roughly 17 years. Came away with 0 degrees, but 2 national championships. Like, Hendon Hooker was a guy that was, a starter at Virginia Tech and then was there for a while. Like, he didn't end up leaving to the NFL until he was like 24, 25. Like, there was, if y'all remember that year when it was Stetson and Hendon Hooker, you had those 2 guys who were older than like 8 or 9 starting NFL quarterbacks. It might have been more than that. So it's especially at that position, but I think across all positions, when you have that those are grown-ass men. Excuse my language for dropping the A word. But I mean, those are grown-ass men. And you've got that all across the board. So, I mean, there's some areas where you lack it. You talk about receiver and stuff like that, where I think you are going to depend on some younger guys, but you've got good recruits there as well. So the 2 things I feel like people aren't talking nearly enough about with this team specifically, I mean, again, it's such a year of turnover and change, and like in so many ways, and some of them that are we've talked about, so we're blue in the face about, like, with the SEC and adding Texas and Oklahoma and all the conference realignment and all that crap, right? I cannot wait to not talk about that stuff as soon as the season starts. I feel like we've been talking about conference realignment for and NIL stuff for 2 or 3 years, almost like daily, it feels like. But with all those changes, right, across the board, the one place, 1 out of 2, that you don't have that in, the one that's like the most stable, is in Columbia, South Carolina. And I think that level of stability is a very, very big deal going into year, especially when you talk about, like, the national perception of this, they got a new quarterback and they don't have anybody at receiver, and they're going to be thin up front on the defensive line, and their offensive line was so bad last year. And it's like, well, hold on a second, take a step back. You have a lot more stability in some key places. And then you also talk about the fact that the turnover that you do have, and we did a full show on this. I hope you go watch it again after this, because it's my favorite one we've done since I started doing the podcast. Talking about Sean Elliott coming in here. Sean Elliott is one of the most magnetic personalities and just dudes that I have ever had the pleasure of talking with. Had him for an interview on an old podcast. He did everything like outside. He told us about the ins and outs of their team at Georgia State and the ins and outs of how they beat Tennessee and all. And then he did everything, like, including telling me about the best ice cream shop, like, in downtown Atlanta. Like, this guy, like, I could have talked to that dude for hours. That guy is one of the grittiest and I think, like, man's man dudes that you'll see in college football. Leaves a head coaching job to come to coach tight ends at South Carolina. So even where there is turnover, you have in my opinion, a huge upgrade. And I think a lot of Gamecock fans that remember what he was like and what those teams were like when he was on staff would agree with that. So I think that's something that not enough people are talking about. That's just me. You guys might disagree. Let me know in the comments if you do, or if there's other things that I'm also missing that we're not talking about. One of the reasons I put on the actual thumbnail for the show was Debo Williams. That might be the epitome and the face of the faceless, I feel like, of college football this year. That kid is one of the best players in the country, not just even at his position, but one of the best players in the country, and is seemingly always unnoticed. So maybe it's just because of the team that's on his across his jersey on his chest, or the logo on the side of the helmet, and it just being what happens in South Carolina when people are constantly overlooking them. I think that there's a lot of potential here this season for things to be a lot more balanced and stable than people really realize outside of Columbia. So that is all for the first segment. I appreciate you guys joining us along again, and again, making this your first listen. Hey, listen, before we move on to the next segment, I want to remind you guys about our good friends at Game Time and the Game Time app. Cannot sing these guys' praises nearly enough. There is just a laundry list of things that I love about Game Time and the way this app works. I encourage you to go over there, download the app, set up an account. Like I said, use Locked On College. You get $20 off your first purchase. But I mean, my goodness, y'all, like I'm talking about, you can prioritize last minute deals. You can save up to 60% off from buying last minute on not just sports, but concerts, comedy, theater, whatever. You can do flash deals where you save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. You can do zone deals. So if you want to set, like I said yesterday, you want to make sure you are in the shade at Willie B early on in one of those hot September or October afternoons. You can save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats for you. And then my personal favorite thing is not even the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you find a cheaper ticket on a different site or app, right? That's not even my favorite part. My favorite part is you get seat views before you buy the tickets, so you can see exactly what you're in store for before you step foot in the stadium. And on top of that, you can get all-in pricing, which is a perfect compliment to anyone that is going to buy things online. I complain about it all the time, whether it's Uber Eats, whether it's Ticketmaster, or whatever. You can see your full all-in pricing up front as you're making your purchase with the Game Time app. So make sure you can go today, go to Game Time app, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account, redeem the code Locked On College. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, when we return, we're going to talk about some blasts from the past, as well as some basketball as well, and some of the more disrespect in yet another sport for South Carolina on the preseason college basketball power rankings. So make sure you stick around for that. Locked On Gamecocks returns right after this. All right, guys, welcome back in. Thank you again for joining us and making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen every day. Before we get started on the next part of the show, remember to make sure your second listen and is enjoying the Locked On College Football podcast. Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron with discussion on the upcoming season and year and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, including conference realignment, the transfer portal, NIL, new college football expanded playoffs, and more. Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team, say with me, guys, every day. All right. Where do we want to go next? I got two things I want to talk about. I think I'm going to start here instead. We'll keep the football theme rolling before we get into basketball. Yesterday was the anniversary of, I think it's the 10th anniversary of SEC Network launching. And love those guys over there, PB and Peter Burns and Dari and Chris Doring and all those guys. Had a chance to get, become close friends with them over the last several years. 2019, I got to actually go up there for a weekend and watch a full Saturday of games with them, which is, it was incredible. A lot of fun to watch. They do a tremendous job, and they've done a tremendous job promoting this conference. But since it's their 10th anniversary, they have gone through a lot of lists and rankings, all that kind of stuff over their 10 years. And one of the things they've been talking about over the last week, they did, I think, top 10 quarterbacks in the SEC in the last 10 years, receivers and running backs, all that kind of stuff. And then they talked about the top 10 games and moments in the SEC. So it got me thinking, what are the top? I'm going to do top 5 SEC or South Carolina games over the last 10 years. And these are just mine. These will be different, I'm sure, from y'all. Let me know again in the comments or on our Twitter at Vern Funquist CFB or Locked On SC, what your favorite game was, or if there's a game I'm forgetting, because I feel like there's a couple fringe. I think we're all going to have the same top 2. I know we're going to all have the same top 1, but there's probably a couple fringe ones that could be right around the top 5. So let me know what those are for y'all as well. I'm going to start at 1, and then I'm going to Tarantino this and go from back to front, and instead of just a linear way, because I think we all know what number 1 is. And it's the 2022 Clemson win in fake Death Valley. That was, to this day, I mean, you go into a situation where no one's giving you a chance, even despite what happened the week before. You go into that game in fake Death Valley, they're coming off like a 40-game winning streak or whatever. And it really, I think my favorite part about it is Clemson fans, they really, really love to play both sides of this. Oh, golly gee, shucks, we're just some good old boys from, right around near Anderson, Lake Keowee, and we're not Auburn with a lake. We're so much different than that. It is very much it's just different here attitude, which is kind of like Auburn, over there at Clemson, and how we just do things the right way. And this holier than now BS is what it is, while at the same time being one of the most arrogant and insufferable fan bases in the country. Like, it just could not be prouder that in their minds, they're constantly winning the right way. The stuff that Dabo is doing, not only with the portal, it is a trickle-down effect and a top-down effect of from their head coach all the way down to their fan base, of how again, playing both sides of, man, we're poor old Clemson, we're just flying under the radar, and to also where their actual arrogance is and lies is, we're better than everyone. Not just on the field. We're better than everyone off the field. We're better than everyone off the field on Saturdays, on the field on Saturdays, off the field on Sundays in church especially. We're just better than everybody. Watching them lose, and losing partially because of some of their own arrogance with like the trick plays and stuff like that. I almost cussed there. Awesome. It's just awesome. So I think we could all agree that's number 1. I'm going to go back to number 5 here. Okay. Number 5. This, again, we might disagree on this. I've got 2018 Mizzou as my 5th favorite game from South Carolina. And listen, I there's probably some stuff you could have picked from 2017 because you had 9 wins that year and all that kind of stuff. But the 2018 game against Mizzou was one of my favorites for a number of reasons, but mainly because it was such a blank show of football. And it's one of the things I feel like that makes college football so great. First off, you're down at halftime, right? You're down at halftime 23-14. You're playing a Mizzou team that's 3-1. I think Carolina was 2-2 at the time. And you have to start a backup quarterback. Now, this is 2017 when Mizzou had Drew Lock. Drew Lock set a single season record for SEC touchdown passes in the SEC right before this. And Mizzou had a good team offensively. Michael Scarnecchia, the Michael Scarnecchia legacy game. Michael Scarn for you Office fans. One of my favorite things. And it was just pouring down rain. I wasn't in the stands that day, but I would almost guarantee you it was somehow still probably 90 degrees. It rained. It was a monsoon that day. But yeah, paging Michael Scarn comes in. I think it was his only start he ever had. Throws for almost 250 yards, has 3 touchdowns. And then, of course, you have Parker White hitting a game-winning 33-yard field goal with 2 seconds left, and you win 37-35. That was a ton of fun. Watching that on TV and being dry while watching it especially was awesome. Okay, this is where number 4, I feel like I might lose a couple of people, but just hear me out here, okay? Number 4, I've got the Duke's Mayo Bowl at the end of the 2021 season against UNC. Weird game, right? You're an underdog, I believe, by like 7 points. Dak Joyner gets the start at quarterback, goes 9 for 9, has over 220 yards of total offense. I mean, he was awesome. Kevin Harris doing Kevin Harris things, runs for over 150 yards. and a TD. The breakout game, you want to say, or career game for Jaheim Bell, 5 catches, 159 yards. You also have the moment at the end of it that stayed around for such a long time with Shane Beamer, where he gets the bucket of mayonnaise dumped on him. I will say this, guys, to have a hard time even still watching that, because I just start driving, because the consistency of mayonnaise is so gross to me. But what a moment. And again, you go into that game against a UNC team where UNC had some good players. Like, you had Sam Howell and Drake May on that team. Drake May obviously didn't start, but Sam Howell was going to end up being a lot of people were pretty high on him from like a draft standpoint. He comes in, doesn't do much. Kind of a weird, I think it was also a little bit rainy in this one. I know it was like overcast as hell, but you go into that UNC game, and I remember this being like in those like bowl pick'em things. It was like, there were a lot of people that were like, oh my gosh, yeah, Dak Joyner's not going to get it done. Like, what does South Carolina have? Like, fun story. They made it to a bowl game in Beamer's first year, but whatever, blah, 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 blah. And they go up 18-0 in the first quarter, and they boat race UNC 38-21. That was a lot of fun. There were a lot of South Carolina fans that were in Charlotte that day and had themselves a blast. And so it's always fun when you like, and that's like, that's a game that against a team that you've gone back and forth with over the last decade or so. It's also always fun. Like, in South Carolina has this happen a lot, where you're an underdog and you go in and get a big win. I think 4 of the 5 games I've got on here, they're an underdog and did really well. Number 3 for me, this one could have maybe even gone higher, but this was so crazy to this day. I don't know. I mean, I know how it happened, but 2019, Georgia, South Carolina. This was a game I remember watching this, and maybe this is a terrible take that I should not even share with you guys, but I remember watching this and thinking, like, maybe Kirby doesn't get it. Like, maybe he doesn't get it, because Carolina is a 4-8 team that year. By all means, they were not a very good football team. You go, Georgia is coming off that 2018 season where they're barely lose to Alabama for a spot in the playoff, and probably should have gotten in the playoff in 2018, to be honest. They were that good. Knocking on the doorstep the year before that in 2017, lost on second in 26. You come into 2019, they're one of the best teams in the country, and you lose in double overtime to 4-8 South Carolina at home. Noon kickoff, probably hot as hell that day too. But Rodrigo Blankenship missing that like 50, I think it was like a 49 or 50-yard field goal or something like that in double OT, hooks it left. South Carolina wins on the road. You rip up the hedges, take them back home to the 803. Love to see that. That was a fun day. 3 interceptions from Jake Fromm, including one right before halftime. He gets turned for a touchdown. That was a wild game. I think a lot of people, even me now, I'm looking at them like, how did this even happen? But an awesome game for me. And then I'll tell you what, the very last one for me. This one, as a quote unquote outsider, could be number 1 easily. Tennessee in 2022. Okay. Tennessee in 2022. Let's pull the stats real quick, just to be on the safe side. I should have already had this up here. But there's so much of this game that is, I remember watching this, and it was like, I remember thinking to myself, the entire SEC and maybe the entire country owes a handwritten thank you card to South Carolina. Like if your mom was involved in college football, she would have made you write a thank you note to South Carolina that day watching that game. Because you want to talk about the most insufferable fan base in America. Tennessee. South Carolina goes in. Tennessee is 9-1. They're ranked 6th in the country. They've got 1 loss, and it's to Georgia. Remember, they were number 1 in the college football playoff rankings at the start of the month. They come in here. They got 2 games left. It was them and Vandy, and they're going to get into the playoff. And obviously, the thing with Hendon Hooker sucks. He tears his ACL. He's out for the game, and that part was awful. But they come into a night game in Willie B, and one of the biggest flexes I have ever heard in my damn life. You scored so many points on them, they ran out of effing fireworks in the stadium. That is just one of the greatest sentences of all time. Spencer Rattler, 438 yards, 30 of 37, 438 yards, 6 touchdowns. My God, that was a fun game. Yeah, Juice Wells went off too. I'm trying to find it. It's not listing what Tennessee was a 22.5-point favorite. And again, sucks what happened with Hendon Hooker. That's terrible. 22.5-point favorite. All they got to do is get through this game and they're home free. I'm telling you, man, South Carolina in that game, it was, and let's also keep in mind, it could have been worse. Like it could have been worse. It was 63-31, and Tennessee scored with 1 minute and 14 seconds left. South Carolina beat the brakes off that Tennessee team. That's also a Tennessee team that made a commemorative book after they beat Alabama halfway through the season about how great their 2022 season was. My goodness. That was one of the greatest, in my opinion, that's one of my favorite games in SEC history. That was just like last 10 years SEC history. God, that's funny. You ran out of fireworks and just unbelievable. All right. That is all for our favorite games. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about South Carolina being overlooked in yet another sport, talking about basketball this time, and we will close out the show. So make sure you stay tuned in for that. This is, again, Locked On Gamecocks. All right, guys, welcome back in, and we are finishing up today's show with one of the dumbest things I've seen in a while. And the only reason I'm bringing it up is because, yes, it is. It's on social media, so it's not something that should be necessarily taken seriously. But we will also talk about this. It is a pre-season because it's about to be basketball season somehow already. You're starting to see some of these preseason All-American teams come out, power rankings. There was several, I believe. Forgot which site put it out, but they put out their preseason top 25 already. And you get multiple teams from around the SEC per usual that are going to be involved and ranked up high there. But this is from someone named Terrence Oglesby. Horrible name. No offense, Terrence. It's just a very tough name to get through, I feel like, second grade. That's all I'll say. Not an attack, just again. But Terrence Oglesby says his way too early SEC predictions. Okay. This conference is going to be loaded. But unlike every other sport, you could say, man, Texas and OU are going to make an instant impact on how deep this conference is and how it just got even deeper. That's not the case with men's basketball at all. Like, maybe the least likable coach in the entire SEC, which is really saying something when you have Nate Oates and John Calipari. But the dude from Texas who got all bent out of shape and butthurt over the horns down thing a year ago comes in. OU is god-awful in basketball, but he ranks the top. He ranks the entire conference in his not just power rankings, but his actual preseason predictions. This is a guy that has been on Field 68, ESPN, CBS, all that kind of stuff. Covers the NBA for Bally in North Carolina. But this is what he has: Alabama at 1, Kentucky at 2, Tennessee at 3, Ole Miss at 4, Arkansas 5, right? Florida 6. A&M 7, Texas 8, Auburn 9, Mississippi State 10, 11, South Carolina Gamecocks, 12 Mizzou, 13 Vandy, 14 Georgia, 15 LSU, 16 Oklahoma. I'll tell you right now, the first two things I saw in here, Georgia's too low because they're going to be very, very improved this year in year 2 under Mike White or year 3 under Mike White, whichever one it is. They've recruited well. They're going to be a lot better than they were a year ago. Auburn being behind Texas is insane. Auburn being at 9 with what they have returning and the way they recruited and having Bruce Pearl as a head coach is dumb as hell. But South Carolina at 11, I think, again, I feel like once a week I'm having some weird epiphany covering South Carolina sports now that it's like, man, I didn't realize how bad the overlooking is because it's not even just in football. It's probably in every sport besides women's basketball. Did I miss last year when this team finished the year tied for 3rd in the conference in what was probably the best, not probably, but was the best conference in the country in basketball even then? They finished 3rd last year. They returned 43% of their production, which is top half of the SEC. And you got them at 11. And here's the issue, guys, is because this is what pisses me off more than anything with it, is you had them at 11. You had them at 11. I'm putting away the notebook, and we're just going to go off the cuff here and yell. You had them at 11, which is, in my mind, the same disrespect that you have for for the football team, because in football, it's like, okay, who's at the very bottom? Vandy, Arkansas, Mississippi State. All right, where do we put South Carolina after that? Oh, right above it. So they're not like in the basement. They're right above it. And then you talk about basketball, and it's like the 5 teams you have listed below South Carolina are garbage. Mizzou was terrible last year. I don't believe they won a single conference game. If they did, it was one. Vandy, awful. Just awful. Oklahoma, awful. What am I missing here? Georgia was bad at times. I think they're going to be better. But what am I missing from what they have returning on this team, right? And also the high ceiling with some of the players they have returning and where they compare to other players in the league. Like, what are we talking about? 11th in the SEC. It was shocking to me that a team who finished in the top 3 a year ago is now being considered in the bottom third of the conference by this person. I probably shouldn't get worked up over it, but it is what it is. It's still talking season, I guess. Hopefully that guy does much less of the talking for the rest of the season. So that's all we have today. I hope you guys had a fantastic Thursday, or what's left of it. I am about to go to the airport. I'll be traveling a little bit, but you will still be getting the show tomorrow as well. So hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your afternoon. Appreciate you guys listening. If you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe to the YouTube. Follow us on social media, Vern Funquist CFB. Drop any topics or comments or whatever you want to me personally on Twitter or my DMs and all that kind of stuff. And like I said, it's y'all's show. Want this to be geared towards the stuff y'all want to talk about as well. We do have 9 days until kickoff. Like I said, we're in the single digits. It means you have 16 left for South Carolina. But we will be back tomorrow. Before we go, I wanted to give you a friendly reminder. Locked On College Football, right? Make sure after listening to Locked On Gamecocks and making it your first listen, I appreciate that, make sure you go check out for your second listen, Locked On College Football. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors, Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Y'all have a fantastic rest of your afternoon.